Hi folks, I'm Geek here. Unfortunately, they didn't have the microphones on until the 3-minute, 10-second mark, so fast forward there for some audio. Sorry for the inconvenience.
Hello. Hi. Oh, I gotta tone it down. Alright, so like I said, Molody, Ransomware. That's what we're doing here today. So we're gonna go through a whole bunch of topics that are pretty important, and I'm just gonna kick it off really fast. So the intro, what is ransomware? Heard that outside. Ransomware is essentially a really nasty type of malware that likes to disrupt your access to a computer, usually through encrypting some type of file. And it says, hey, pay us a ransom to get your files back or to get access back to your system. So every type and strain is completely different, uses different types of encryption, thus different solutions. Constantly changing, so as you come up with a solution, you have to go back and find a new one. Varies in level of sophistication, intrusiveness, persistence. Some are just stupid lock screens. You could go from anything to that to totally completely owning your system. And attacks basically center on either just blocking access to your computer or a device, or encrypting data and holding your files hostage. Most forms start off as any form of malware really does, with some type of phishing link or some type of email-based scheme. Brain. So the first type of ransomware was written in 1989. It asked for $189. It was called the AIDS Trojan. It didn't actually do anything. It just encrypted the names of files and moved them around on the system so people thought that their files were gone. But today's ransomware is a lot more sophisticated. It's a lot more lucrative. So in 2016, They expect that the number of variants expanded by somewhere between 11 and 30 times. It's literally a booming industry right now. An average ransom was about $679 per machine. And for corporations, it can be as high as $60,000 in terms of what they're paying to get their data back. There were approximately 638 million ransomware attacks in 2016. So every 10 seconds, a consumer was hit, and every 40 seconds, a business was hit. So when we talk about the amount of cases that you're starting to see in the landscape, it's becoming really increasingly common. Ransomware payouts likely topped approximately $1 billion last year. As I said, we have a plan, overview, we're going to get through it. So some of the fun ones that were in the news over the last few months, there was the DC police surveillance one. It basically locked out 123 of 187 of their closed-circuit TV camera DVRs, so they weren't able to record data for approximately 3 days. They actually didn't have to pay in this instance, and they were able to restore everything using their own resources. So this one actually had a pretty good outcome. Smart TVs are finally starting to get hit. This makes me feel justified in why I don't want to buy a smart TV. They asked for $500 to unlock it. It also says it's like the FBI. That's one of my favorite things. Repairs are about $340. So at some point, buying a new TV might actually be less costly than trying to fix this yourself. It came through some type of sketchy third-party application to watch movies, most likely pirated movies. So be careful out there. Consumers have a difficult time dealing with these because a lot of manufacturers make the reset of a TV very difficult for a consumer, so they try to get you into that shop so you'll pay that extra fee. So in this case, sometimes it's a little hard to fix these devices because it's proprietary knowledge. But the great news is most people don't store a ton of data on their TV, so it's not like they're really going to be missing something that's crucial. Come on. This was one of my favorites. There was a hotel in Austria where no guests could get back into their hotel room. They had actually taken over the system that did all the key cards, and they locked them out so that they couldn't actually create new keys. They had to pay approximately $1,800. That was the market price of the 2 Bitcoins to get people back into their hotel rooms. Now, Jared gets to talk about mobile stuff.
Hey everybody, I'm Jared. I was actually a Bloomsburg University student like many of you sitting here, and I'm here to show you that there is light at the end of the tunnel. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some mobile device ransomware here. So in regards to iOS ransomware, sometimes you'll get this screen. You'll say this device is locked, pay me this money, and send me some sort of communication to this email address. So in regards to this, the good news is your iPhone is not hacked, but your iCloud is. So someone went into your iCloud account, went on Find My iPhone, and said, make this the lock screen. If you actually wanted to get around this, all you have to do is put in your passcode or change your password on the iCloud. But people get so freaked out by this, they actually communicate with these people, send them the money, and they reset it but still have access to their iCloud. So it's really just a huge scare tactic. But at this point, there's no known iOS ransomware on non-jailbroken iPhones. Android's a different story. So new ransomware reaches Google Play Store. So this happened back in January with this Energy Rescue app. Basically, this application steals users' text messages and contact lists and then locks the phone. This one is huge because it was the first ransomware that ever reached the Google Play Store. It was able to bypass security by having encrypted code, and it routinely checked if the app was being run in an Android emulator. So if someone like Google was testing it in an emulator, it halted everything and was able to hide itself. So some trends going on right now. There's been an increase by 50% of attacks in 2016 from 2015. Most ransomware discovered in apps installed from outside of the Google Play Store. So, like a spam email or something like that, or a shady link. They're becoming much smarter these days. Now you can wipe the device, reset the lock screen, access your camera, open URLs, steal your files, track you. So some other trends going on right now. This is just an example screen of something you'd see. So, like I said before, the only known case of ransomware app reaching the Google Play Store is that battery saver. So some ransomware families for Android. So SimpLocker was the first discovered mobile ransomware to encrypt Android devices, which was developed in Russia. As for $300 payment, this was pretty standard to start with, and people are actually paying this. So the adult player, this one was my personal favorite. It's just insane. So it's an adult video player, I'll put that in quotes, and it actually worked at first. You're able to watch your videos, and it would actually take pictures of you while you're watching these in the app. You know, a little bit later, maybe a few hours, whatever, and it would take your photo and put that in the ransom message. So there's you having your good old dandy time saying, if you don't pay me this $100 or $500, this is getting out there. So yeah, it's a huge fear thing. So Lockdroid, disguised as a Google update, it would, once infected, malware starts logging all your user activity. So if you have a text message that was kind of naughty, they would put that up there and say, okay, give me this money, or that's getting out there. That's pretty much the theme with all this Android ransomware. Xbot steals your personal data by faking login screens. So, you load up Chase Bank, say, this is my username and password. You're not actually logging into Chase Bank, you're logging into basically their logger, and they get that information. That's all I have for you.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about triaging ransomware. But first, I wanted to talk about what ransomware is and how it works. So I'm a malware writer. I'm going to author some ransomware. Basically, what I do is I generate a public-private key pair. If you guys have ever encrypted anything, you know how this works. I keep my private key pair, my private key, private to me, and I take the public key and I actually embed it in my malware. And then I send it out. I can either find vulnerabilities that I can exploit, weak passwords where I can log into a system and execute it. You can embed it in malicious Office documents and send it out via email. You can use basically any method you can think of to get malware on a machine. Vulnerable versions of Flash and Java. All of those have been known to drop a ransomware file on a machine. Once it actually runs on your machine, your computer will generate a private key pair. Just a private key. It can use things like CPU ID, MAC address, IP address, some sort of unique identifier that's unique to your hardware. Oftentimes, it'll just randomly generate one. Typically, they use a Microsoft Crypto API. They don't have to actually put a ton of extra code in there. And then it will start crawling through your machine and encrypting all your files. Your private key that you generated is what is required to unlock all of your files when they get encrypted. That private key is then actually re-encrypted with a public key that's embedded in there. Meaning, the only way to get that is through the private key that I still hold. So you pay me money, I get your symmetric key that you generated, I use my private key, I unencrypt it, and then you then have the passphrase or the equivalent key that will go through and decrypt your files. This is typically when you start to have a bad day. This was a ransomware variant that actually claimed to do full disk encryption. So rather than encrypting individual files, it actually just encrypted the master boot record on the machine, and then blue screened it so that when it came back on, this is the screen that you got, where you had to go into one of these onion URLs on the dark web, put that encryption key in, and pay them, and you could get your money back. This actually didn't encrypt all the files on the system. So if you remove the hard drive, you can get past the MBR. You can then actually see all of your files and data. So this just encrypted the MBR. Get help if you actually figure that you are compromised with ransomware, or a company you're working with has been breached with ransomware. I have to say, after working a ton of these cases, the security department and the IT department are my worst nightmare. They screw more things up than they possibly can help. So stop what you're doing, breathe, make sure management doesn't lose their minds. And if you have cyber breach insurance, you might want to look at it. Some companies will actually purchase breach insurance that'll help them. There's a breach coach that can get involved, that can help you out and make sure you have all the necessary skills. Also, figure out what kind of industry you're working in. If you're in healthcare, if you get hit with ransomware, that could cause you to do a data breach disclosure notification where you have to send out those nasty letters. You've got to move fast. So quarantine and triage these devices as quick as you can. Sometimes the ransomware will go up in cost the longer you wait. So the faster you pay them, the cheaper it is. It depends on whether or not what got encrypted. Is it an end user laptop? Is it a server? How critical is it to your business? A lot of the insurance claims can be based off of loss of business, so business interruption claim. And that's why they're actually paying a lot of the ransomware. Quarantine the devices. Make sure that they're not still on the network. Most of the ransomware out there now won't just encrypt your local machine. It also tries to use your credentials or escalate privileges and crawl the network. And create a log of these infected devices and prioritize them. Who has the most important data? Which ones would you want to decrypt faster? You've got backups, right? Most businesses are like, yes, we back up everything. We have backups. Awesome. If their stuff is backed up, there's no ransom to pay. Restore your backup, patch, move on. Oftentimes, backups will get encrypted. I've got this last one on there where they had near-time snapshots and replication. This is popular for businesses now where they've got two offices and one office will mirror another office. So if a server gets hit with ransomware, basically all it does is say, okay, great, I'm going to take all the files that are my backup on this other office and it replicates them down and it encrypts all of their backups and snapshots in real time. If you don't have any backups, your data's encrypted, it's important, you're probably going to have to pay the ransomware. But there's the first things you need to sort of figure out to do. Figure out what kind of ransomware you have, and is it actually a ransomware? There's a lot of ransomware out there that was just a lock screen, just becomes annoying, just prevents sort of an end user from getting access to their desktop or getting access to certain files. Some of the ransomware only just XORed data, basically just bit shifted it that you can get past and just get your data back. Some of the ransomware is actually crap where they actually do embed the private key in there. So if you go through the malware and reverse it, you can pull the key back out and decrypt your files. Doing encryption properly is hard, so the malware writers don't get it right all the time. Figuring out what kind of ransomware you have. The screen, whatever ransom screen that gets popped up will be a clue. Sometimes there are email addresses that are listed. Files will get renamed or appended with the email addresses. The Bitcoin wallet that they're asking you to pay money to can help you identify this. Doing internet research and figuring out what kind of ransomware you have will help. Talked about the initial triage. What are your files encrypted? Strain of ransomware. How many machines do you have and how much data? If no solution can be found, you can always try to get your data back through forensic means. Most of this ransomware now, in fact, all of it that I've seen, will go through and delete your volume shadow copies. If you're doing forensics, you know that volume shadow copies are those snapshots or previous versions of files. So the initial sort of first round of ransomware that came out, everybody's like, well, I can just right-click on this file, say show previous version, get that file version back, and I'm good. These will go through and delete all your shadow copies. The thing to note is that it doesn't actually do any sort of secure delete or overwrite. So even though they run this command and delete all your volume shadow copies, they're still there. You can still recover them, and you can still parse them to get some data back sometimes. And then, good old data recovery. This is all the stuff that you're probably learning in class and you've done for typical data recovery. You can file carve. You can go through and look for different types of files. Not all the data gets encrypted. Usually certain file extensions that it goes after. Quarantine your devices, but do not start running antivirus on them and getting rid of it. Sometimes the malware itself, the ransomware that gets put in your system, actually has the code in it to decrypt and unlock the files. If the antivirus goes through and starts finding the malware and deleting it, you don't have that malware around anymore, so you can actually decrypt your data. Having a personal knowledge base or somewhere to look is helpful. We'll talk about some of this in a little bit. Figure out what you need to decrypt. Is the data critical? If it's not, just blow the system away, do a fresh install, load backups. If the data is critical, you're probably going to have to pay. You're going to want to pay in stages, right? You're going to want to make sure that you actually pay for sort of the most important computer, the most important system that has ransomware on it. Make sure you can actually decrypt your files before you do any other payments to the ransomware. If you get a key, use it to decrypt your devices. Save it. Again, lots of malware authors will screw up the encryption. And if I have a key, even though I've only paid for one host, it might work across every single host. Paying ransom. Okay, so there is a website out there. Finally, this has gotten bad enough where a lot of security companies, a lot of antivirus companies have gotten together, and there have been situations where the author of the ransomware has been taken down, found out, put in jail, and they've gotten that private key. All the authors of antivirus companies have gotten together and basically hosted up this page here where any variants of ransomware that they have known keys for, you can go here, check your files, check your data, and you may be able to decrypt it without paying anything. We talked about cyber insurance. This usually applies to the first 48 hours of the case. Your insurance company will pay because it's a business interruption claim. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but average Bitcoin ransoms that we're seeing are not this $400 or $500 range. They've gotten smart where they've realized that once I've encrypted your computer, your data is valuable. And your grandmother's photos are less valuable than corporate documents and company databases. So they actually want you to engage them. To figure out what type of data you have. You actually have to email these people or get on a chat room with them and figure out, and they'll try to get you to send them a few files so that they can decrypt it to figure out, to prove to you that you can decrypt your data. But typically they just want to find out what company you're working for, whose files they have, because it can go up. So while individuals are getting hit with ransomware payments that are $500 and less, companies are getting hit with $40,000 to $60,000. Payments should be a last resort. Ransomware is a problem. It's growing, and it's growing because it actually works. The fact that it actually works means they're making a ton of money off of it. The only way to really stop it is to stop paying them or find a way around it. But it perpetuates the scheme, and it makes it more likely to get struck again. There have been companies that have actually paid ransoms and then not cleaned up and gotten their systems encrypted again, and they've had to pay it twice. If you need to make contact with somebody to negotiate your ransom, you've got to use a ton of social engineering skills. Don't be emailing them from a corporate email address. Pretend you're a little old lady who has no idea what's going on. Try to get that ransom down as much as you can. Typically, they want ransomware in the form of Bitcoin. Some of them ask for gift cards and other types of payment, but it's typically Bitcoin. If you've not already set up a method to purchase Bitcoin, it can take a long time. If you go out in like Coinbase and you try to get an account, they've got to validate your bank account. If you want to buy Bitcoin, it can take 2 or 3 days. You might be limited to the amount of Bitcoin that you can actually purchase. And the entire time you're down, your systems are down. So there are other ways to get Bitcoin, but if you ever walk in a situation where you need $50,000 in Bitcoin in less than 24 hours, that can be pretty difficult. Transmitting the ransomware funds. Typically want to send things through a tumbler. Best practices, take your Bitcoin, tumble them, anonymize it a little bit. Keep track of where the money goes, which Bitcoin address. You can trace that down, and I'll show you a little bit about how that works here in this guy. So this was a guy we dealt with a few months ago, back in August of 2016. At the time that we were dealing with this guy, he was at 146 transactions to one wallet address of about 1.2 Bitcoin. So today's value, a little over $1,500 for 148 ransomware infections. And we started tracing him through the blockchain, figuring out where he goes. And then you see all the other smaller wallets that he was using to generate his ransomware payments getting merged into a larger wallet. And as of a few days ago, he was doing pretty good. So it's about 8 months worth of work, and he ended up with just a little bit less than $900,000. So that's not too bad for a few days worth of work for one ransomware variant. So it's profitable. They're doing it, and keeping track of the Bitcoin addresses and where that goes and following stuff through the blockchain is helpful, especially if you work with law enforcement. Eventually, these guys will get caught. Eventually, their Bitcoin will get confiscated. And if you've got a record of you paying Bitcoin, following it through the blockchain, you have a chance of getting some of your money back. Melody's going to talk about cooperating with law enforcement.
So one of the really important things in general is cooperating with other organizations. So first we're going to talk about law enforcement, but they're not the only people, obviously. So information sharing with law enforcement agencies is extremely important for any type of case, especially anyone involving some type of financial items. Incidents are underreported, so that makes investigations really difficult. The FBI, they put out this little, report every year about sort of the state of cybersecurity. And, I think it was somewhere between 30 and 40% is, what they're estimating is being reported. A lot of people aren't reporting because they don't want to send out those data breach notices that Chad was talking about. So they try to keep it in-house and they try to hide it, but that actually only helps perpetuate the problem. It's best to conduct your own investigation and give them as much information as humanly possible. There have been some instances where actually trying to bring law enforcement in to help with the investigation has made the investigation take much longer. It's made a whole bunch of the devices turn into toast before you're able to actually get your data back. So this is something that is definitely sort of recommended. And as Chad said, if these guys are actually caught, because you've actually given all of this information to law enforcement, they might actually be able to give you some of your assets back. The FBI actually has a list of what to submit. So if you go to the Internet Crime Complaint Center, literally they ask for everything. What type of variant was it? Where'd you send the money? What happened? Give us all of your data. But also share this information with the security community. There are a lot of researchers out there, who work with one another to come up with methods for unlocking it, with new ways to try to stop schemes. They build new little tools that you can install on computers. All of these things are really helpful, and without you sharing this information with somebody else, nobody's going to be able to fix the problem.
All right, so preventing some of these infections and looking for data, Ross. Ransomware is profitable. That's why we see so much of it. Your data is literally held at ransom. It's information that you need, and you're willing to pay to get it back. It's not going to go away. The Internet of Things is making this even better. TVs, cameras, all that other weird peripheral stuff that you can't patch and manage, that's going to start getting taken over. I can see this coming up in the winter where your Nest thermostat gets stuck at 55 degrees on like the coldest day ever, and they're like, give me $100, I'll turn your heat back on. So, this is coming. Your antivirus sucks. I've actually not worked a ransomware case where we've had an infection. Every single one of them has been running antivirus, and every single one of them has been up to date. So the variants are just coming out way too fast, and they're not keeping up. So antivirus sort of sucks. The best way is through getting through this is due diligence. Application whitelisting is also a great way to do this. It can be a pain in the ass to manage on endpoints, but for servers and a lot of other critical infrastructure where there's not a lot going on, whitelisting is the way to go that's kind of blocking this stuff. A lot of this is going to come down to education. Most of the ransomware that gets infected is coming from some user doing something stupid. They're clicking on email attachments. They're going to shady websites and they're getting downloads and they're clicking on those. Better training and better security habits will help you prevent this. Backing up. Obviously, there's nothing to pay. There's no ransom. Nothing is hostage if you have a copy of your data somewhere. Backing it up, making sure it's not accessible is a way to keep you from doing that. And making sure you have a plan. Your environment changes, making sure you have a knowledge base or somewhere where you can go for resources. I'm kind of shocked at how little some of the ransomware community, people have actually paid ransomware escrow this. There's been no database of like known keys that people have paid for ransomware with that you can actually go to say, okay, I've paid a ransom. Does it actually work? Am I getting my data back? Okay, here's the key. Is there a way for me to figure out how to use that key with the ransomware itself to figure out if there's a wider decryption for that entire strain? It's not happening a lot. Identifying the root cause. We hear a lot about APT, right? They had advanced persistent threat. It's the persistence that's going to help you with the ransomware. Figuring out where it is, how it gets installed, and why it's coming back will help you figure out where it comes from. Doing things like looking at auto runs, running a timeline on this, log analysis, event correlation, anything else you can think of in your forensic bag of tricks to basically do an incident response type investigation on a machine to help you figure out how you initially got infected. That'll help you avoid future infections in the past. Spore of Ransomware is out. This one just came out a few weeks ago. I liked it because it was like the most user-friendly ransomware that ever existed. You got this nice little screen. It was awesome. You know, it was designed well. They tell you the type of encryption you're using. Spore was also interesting because when it generated that symmetric key for encryption of files, it didn't have to transfer it back. So you could actually get this ransomware air-gapped. And the private key did not need to go back to the attackers for you to figure out how to do it. They actually gave you the private key here that was encrypted. And when you actually went to the website, it was great. They told you you had to upload your key file that you saw in that previous window, and it would actually track things for you. How many files you got encrypted, what your timeline was. It had a chat window where you can actually start chatting and getting tech support on how to buy Bitcoins. They would decrypt two of your files for free just to prove that it worked. They offered immunity, which was really cool. The malware looked for a specific file in a registry key. And if you paid this $50 for immunity, you got another application that you ran that just put a registry key and a file in there that would prevent you from getting re-encrypted. So this is basically $50 to say, I don't want my data back, but I don't want to be hit again. So, but it was only $79 to restore your files. And they had a deadline and a payment. So it was great. They're getting really good at this. This is another one that we did recently. This is what I'd like to call good, bad ransomware. They had the encryption right, but they were complete idiots. They were using weak credentials to log into systems through RDP, TeamViewer, whatever they can get their hands on. The system that we took a look at, this is the screen that they got. It was just like an HTML page that got spun and got fired up, and there was an India.com address where you had to actually email them and go through and negotiate how much you were going to have to pay to get your data back. They did encrypt the files. The malware wasn't really that sophisticated. But in this case, they had actually managed to guess enterprise admin or domain admin credentials and log into a machine through a remote desktop that was sitting publicly on the internet. They had no clue what they were doing. They were in and out in 7 minutes, and they did not realize they had like domain admin credentials. Otherwise, they could have infected everything. They basically logged in, opened up a web browser, typed in a short URL, downloaded a file, double-clicked it, and logged off. And that was it. You're trying to explain to somebody, well, that was our enterprise admin account. Why didn't they? They're just not smart, right? You can't ask why for idiots. We had this machine about, 6 or 7 hours after it initially got infected. We did work with them. We were able to restore some backups. Again, this didn't encrypt a ton of data. The file list that it was going after was pretty bad, and it didn't really apply to this system, so there was no payment. But we thought we'd go through anyway and just kind of communicate with these people from a burner Gmail account and see how much money they were really asking for. Bounced. Right? So the only method to communicate with these people was email addresses, and it was already blocked and bounced. So 12 hours later, there was no way to actually communicate with anybody. If you did want your data back, it wasn't going to happen. Shameless plug, we're hiring, come steering this vendor area. And I think that's it. Do we have any questions? Come on, there's always a question. Start in the back. None of them. No, I've seen infections with pretty much every antivirus vendor. I had a Mac that had Cylance on it that didn't catch anything. I can't speak to Cylance for Windows, but I don't know. Carbon Black and a lot of those other ones are doing application whitelisting, so they're doing a lot better. They're not typical signature-based AV.
Have you ever seen
So ransomware we used to cover up another infection. I have not seen that, no. So there has been ransomware out there that's done exfiltration, where it actually will take your data and move it off, and they'll sort of threaten to disclose it if you don't pay. It is an industry-specific problem, and that's a situation where, regardless of what happens, you're going to need to do a data disclosure. You're basically just going to have to assume that you've been completely hacked and your data's been exfiltrated at that point in time. 60 grand was the most we had to pay for a client. And getting, no, that was a network. We got in late on that one. We probably could have there could have been a better job done in the negotiation phase. But it was 60 grand. How often do you pay and not receive anything back? Honestly, not very often at all. That last malware or ransomware strain I showed you was it didn't even have a name to it, right? Wasn't in VirusTotal, wasn't flown up on anybody's radar. This was kind of like an ad hoc one. Most of the popular strains, you do get your data back. That's the reason that ransomware is becoming so successful, right? It works. If you didn't get your data back and you've paid, then it's going to get out there that, hey, if I pay for Locky, I'm not getting my data back. No one's going to pay for it. They don't make any money.
Is there any kind of, I have a server with files on it, and is there any kind of heuristic activity on my server. Everything's getting renamed suddenly. Something that's recommended by the industry at this point that can stop it before it happens.
So something you could put on your systems to basically start to look for like activity of ransomware where like large amounts of files are being, that's going to be your antivirus. And it's just not, it's not working out that well. Honeypots to detect the methods for malware writers. We do use these. So every time we get a piece of ransomware, we'll sandbox it and figure out what it does. Oftentimes it'll try to offload either files or at least your private symmetric key that's used for encryption. It'll try to throw that back over so you can find that in a packet capture at some time. The URLs where it's shoving some of that data off to can be helpful. Sometimes the initial malware is just like it's a dropper. So it could be a Word doc with a macro in it or something that's fairly benign that will actually go out to the internet and then download something else and execute it. So figuring out where that stuff comes from will help out. But a global sort of honeypot, I don't know of any that are out there. A lot of companies will run their own, but go ahead. It depends. A lot of the ransomware is deleting the volume shadow copies, but it's not securely deleting them, so you can still pull those back off and get prior versions. Depending on your system, you may not have one for a week. Servers typically don't run volume shadow copy services that create snapshots, so you're not going to get that on a server. And it depends on the type of file. We have been able to sort of go through and do data carving and find previous versions or temp copies of certain documents. But that's if, you've got a workstation or a computer and everything you have is encrypted, but you just need access to a small amount of data or files. That would work. I wouldn't want to file carve for everything that you could possibly get and be like, here you go. But a lot of it can be recreated, right? So they're not usually encrypting email files and spools, and a lot of your attachments are out there that's got a lot of the data you need in it. It's when the ransomware comes down and starts crawling file shares and encrypting entire network file shares and drives that you're starting to cause a problem. Anybody else?
You guys ever play like hardball with your clients so they'll get like, oh, we can fix it for like 58 grand.
No, usually if you start breaking that like $20,000 or $30,000 mark, you've got really pissed off executives. So, no. What was the other cryptocurrency? Monero? I have not. I have not seen ransomware in Monero. So typically been Bitcoin, some Ethereum.
Yeah.
And other times like Western Union. So. Yeah. Anybody else? No? All right. If you have any other questions, feel free to stop by and chat with us at the booth or find us running around for the next 2 days.
That's so fun.